Acts 23, 11 through 35. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Be encouraged. Just as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so too you must testify in Rome." The next morning, some Jewish leaders formulated a plot and solemnly promised that they wouldn't eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 people were involved in the conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have solemnly promised to eat nothing until we have killed Paul. You and the council must explain to the commander that you need Paul brought down to you. Pretend that you want to examine his case more closely. We're prepared to kill him before he arrives." Paul's sister had a son who heard about the ambush and who came to the military headquarters and reported it to Paul. Paul called for one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander because he has something to report to him." He took him to the commander and said, "The prisoner Paul asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to tell you." The commander took him by the hand and withdrew to a place where they could speak privately. He asked, "What do you have to report to me?" He replied, "The Jewish leaders have conspired to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow. They will pretend that they want to investigate his case more closely. Don't fall for it. More than 40 of them are waiting to ambush him. They have solemnly promised not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting your consent." The commander dismissed the young man, ordering him, "Don't tell anyone that you have brought this to my attention." The commander called 2 centurions and said, "Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to leave for Caesarea at 9 o'clock tonight. Have horses ready for Paul to ride, so they may take him safely to Governor Felix." He wrote the following letter. "Claudius Lysias, to the most honorable Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and almost killed by them. I was nearby with a unit of soldiers and rescued him when I discovered that he was a Roman citizen. I wanted to find out why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their council. I discovered that they were accusing him about questions related to their law. I found no charge deserving of death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a conspiracy against his life, I sent him to you at once and ordered his accusers to bring their case against him before you." Following their orders, the soldiers took Paul during the night and brought him to Antipatris. The following day, they let the horsemen continue on with Paul while they returned to the military headquarters in Jerusalem. The horsemen entered Caesarea, delivered the letter to the governor, and brought Paul before him. After he read the letter, he asked Paul about his home province. When he learned that he was from Cilicia, the governor said, "I will hear your case when your accusers arrive." Then he ordered that Paul be kept in custody in Herod's palace. When we last left our hero, he was still cooling his heels in the pokey, which was probably just fine with him because every time he went outside, there was somebody that was trying to kill him. Every time, meaning at least twice in the preceding day. At least he would be safe as long as he was in the custody of the Roman soldiers, wouldn't he? Or would he? Paul's sister's boy, his nephew, had been hanging out with a bunch of the other kids at the mall and they overheard some of the religious muckety-mucks talking at the tables that are outside of Starbucks. A plot was developing. 40 of them took an oath. They were not going to eat or drink until they had terminated Paul. So they concocted this story, recalling Paul to the council, and then he was going to be, as he was being led into the council chambers, they would jump out from behind the bushes and they would bushwhack him. Well, the boy, the nephew, quickly sought out his uncle Paul, and then Paul figured out how to get the boy, the nephew, to the Roman commander. The Roman commander arranged for a quick change of venue. Caesarea, the provincial capital. The army took 475 men. That shows you how dangerous it was for Romans to be out at night in Palestine. Political tensions were quite high. Anyway, these 475 soldiers were to get Paul out of town under the cover of darkness and well on his way to Governor Felix in Caesarea. And as you heard when I read the story, the mission was successful. The bad guys were thwarted, and Paul and company arrived safely in Caesarea, and to this day, those bad guys are still not eating. Intense drama, action-packed story. This has all of the makings of a blockbuster. But there's a short little scene that's wedged into the action that really defines the story itself. We actually read it last week too. Verse 11, it's a bridge between the riot discussed last week and the murder plot of this week. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Be encouraged. Just as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, you too must testify in Rome." God's goal gets God's providential backing. That is the key point this morning. God's goal gets God's providential backing. God is in charge even when everything is all messed up. You can't stop a steady stream that is of water that's flowing downhill, can you? Gravity. You can't stop water from going downhill. You can put a rock or a small dam in front of it, right? But eventually, if the water is steady and it continues to flow, it's going to cut a new path around the barrier. Or you could dig a reservoir for it, but eventually the reservoir is going to fill up with water, and all that water has got to be released as well. Ultimately, you cannot stop the flow, even the flow toward the heart of the Roman Empire. And up to this point, Paul's been preaching mostly throughout Asia Minor, the areas that we call Greece or Turkey. But now the word comes that Paul will go to Rome with the gospel. By the way, this is the first time in Acts that Rome is seen as a destination, unless you look back at Acts 1:8 and see Rome as, in some sense, the end of the earth. And I believe that this is the case, that Rome is the end of the earth as far as the Jews see it. Jesus said to them, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in
Judea, Samaria,
Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the end of the earth." That's right. Another thing to note here is that when the Lord speaks to Paul, and we don't really know how it is that the Lord is speaking to him, how it came to him, whether it's a vision or an angel or a dream. We don't know how the word of the Lord came to Paul. Luke doesn't seem concerned about telling us that. Just as you have testified about me, you in Jerusalem, so you too must testify in Rome. The message is that you will be a witness in Rome. You will testify in Rome. And the word that the Lord uses here in speaking to Paul is a variation of the same word that he uses with the apostles in Acts 1:8, where he says, you will be my witnesses, martyrs, which is the word for witness. You will be my witness. Paul would be a witness in Rome. Now, there were already Christians in Rome by that time. But this is the first time that Rome is seen as being, or mentioned as being a destination for one of the apostles. God's goal gets God's providential backing. The river flowing into the Gentile world will not be stopped, no matter what. Now, the thing that baffles me about this whole nighttime special word to Paul drama situation is why? The why issue. Why does the Lord feel compelled to visit Paul with this news? Well, I suspect that this visitation functions in three ways, not just for Paul, but also for all people who are working on meeting God-given goals. This notion that God's goal gets God's providential backing, first of all, and this is number one on the message guide, it is a word of encouragement. It's a word of encouragement. But why does Paul need encouragement? I mean, on several occasions, Paul had already made a big deal out of the fact that he is ready to die for the Lord in Jerusalem. He says, I'm already dead anyway. You know, I'm fine. I mean, don't worry about me. I'm fine. If Paul were a pagan, he would have made a good stoic. You know, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. In his mind, he already lived or died for Christ. But you know how it is. You have a similar commitment. It's easy to sit here on Sunday mornings and say, I want my life to count for the Lord. I'm going to live for Him. Or in the words of the old gospel song, take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to Thee. Take my moments and take my days. Let them flow in ceaseless praise. Let them flow in ceaseless praise. We could all sing that and mean it, and that would be our sincere desire for that moment. And we'd sing it boldly, but when you get out of here, and people are trying to kill you because you say them, because you believe those words, or when your marriage falls apart, or your children give you a run for your money, or when you can't get along with your boss because your standards are higher than that of the boss and your company, or when you get really, really sick, it's hard to sing with ceaseless praise. And you wonder whether the whole world is kind of spinning out of control. You know that yours is, in spite of your commitment to Christ, sometimes you just need to hear a word of encouragement. Yes, God is still in charge. Yes, we are still moving forward toward the goal, towards God's goal. Take courage, be encouraged. Your problems, your situations are not going to limit God. I can remember one time in Texas when I was feeling a little bit discouraged. We were about 2 years into this church plant that we were doing. It was the first time that I'd been through the church plant thing, and so I was, just figuring it all out. And suddenly people started moving out of state. Lots of transfers out of the church. Within a few months, most of the people that had called us to help start this church had all moved away. That church was, by the way, incredible. It turned over 40% a year. 40% of the people left every year. And we added 40% more. And to make it even more frustrating emotionally, is that they all seemed to move to Colorado. And if you are in Texas and your friends desert you for Colorado, for the Rockies and the mountains and the clear streams and the lakes and no humidity, it's easy to start to feel bummed about it. And I remember one time when I was praying and I was expressing my frustration to God, and suddenly I had this overwhelming sense that God was saying to me, hang in there and I will bless you. And I'm still not sure what all that blessing entails, but the word of encouragement stuck with me, and it actually sustained me through that time in Texas until it was time to move on to the next place. But sometimes we need to hear a word of encouragement from God, no matter how much you're doing the right thing. Even though we know up here in our heads that He's still involved. We know it up here. But sometimes you need something else that kind of jumps out at you, grabs you. A word of Scripture capturing your imagination. Or a word of affirmation from a friend. It can make a lot of difference. Secondly, this notion that God's goal gets God's providential backing forces us to rethink our understanding of how God operates. It forces us to rethink our understanding of how God operates. Sometimes people will describe a particularly exhilarating worship or ministry experience and they will say, wow, God really showed up. Have you ever heard anyone say that? Yeah, that was a great service today. God really showed up. Now, I would contend that that's a dangerous theological statement. A, because it implies that God is less present when the experience is less exciting. And B, it implies that God is only present and working when things are going well. And it's just, everything's up. I alluded to this last Sunday. We've got a very short-sighted understanding of how God does things. We interpret smooth sailing as blessing, but rough water is seen as God's obstacle. Here, though, is an example of rough water being the water that carries the mission forward. Right? God is just as present and working just as much during the difficult times as He is during the good times. He's there in the midst of your dry times, the unexciting times, just as much as He is there in the midst of the wonderful, upbeat, emotional, high, exciting times. God does not need optimum conditions to get things done. But we're so used to identifying the presence of God with the best of circumstances. However, as asserted here in Acts 23, God's providence assures His success. By the way, providence is the English power word of the day for those who are building up their English vocabulary. Providence means that God is guiding the process toward His desired goal. God is guiding the process toward His desired outcome. A little bit of a short bunny trail here. I like bunny trails. Some Christians, particularly those who are in the Reformed, Calvinist, Presbyterian groups, understand that providence means that God has a plan for every little thing that happens and that those plans are a part of His agenda, and thus He predetermines all of the events that are going to happen in life, and they all culminate in the success of God's ultimate agenda. Other Christians, particularly those in the Arminian groups such as Methodists and Pentecostals and Nazarenes, they understand providence to mean that while God might have a special plan for many events in life, He allows some things to just happen. He does not always intervene in all the details. However, He does weave all the circumstances together, the good and the bad, to lead toward the success of His agenda. Everything, even the bad things, are ultimately worked together through the process so that we arrive at God's destination. In the context of Acts 23, we might say, in the providence of God, all roads lead to Rome. Whether there's blockage, whether there are people that are trying to kill Paul, it's all going to go to the end of the earth, no matter what. God's going to work all the details together. Anyway, there are good, solid Christians in both of these groups, and in all of the nuanced categories in between these groups, and we would all agree that God's providence assures his success. Thirdly, this notion that God's goal gets God's providential backing should be for us an impetus for renewed witness. It should be for us an impetus for renewed witness. Some of us are confused when things get chaotic because we've confused our goals with God's goals. And we get the feeling that God no longer gives a rip because we're not doing or going the direction that we think we should be going, because we think that life is all about our goals. But that's a perception problem. This is not about you, but about God and what he's accomplishing in the world. You are a precious part of that, and in that sense it is about you. But the goals have got to be God's, and it behooves us to remember that what it's all about, and to engage ourselves in the long-term purpose. To make the good news of the cross and the resurrection known to the people in Rome, and Laveen, and Phoenix, and Mesa, and Micronesia, and Eritrea. There are still 7,000 plus unreached people groups in the world. These are people in the world groups of people in the world, cultures, societies that have not even heard about Jesus. 7,000 plus. They are not rejecting Jesus, they just have not heard about Jesus. And the few believers who might be in those cultures lack enough followers of Christ to be around them and the resources to actually evangelize their own people. There just are not any witnesses there, or at least there are very few witnesses there. These 7,000 are the Rome of 2015. And 85% of these 2 billion people live in what is called the 1040 window. Have you heard that term, 1040 window? The core of the unreached people of our world live in a rectangular shaped window that extends from West Africa to East Asia and China. From 10 degrees south of the equator to 40 degrees north of the equator. There are 1 billion fewer unreached people than there were 15 years ago when I first started keeping track of this stuff. And I would contend that it is the growth of the church in Asia, China in particular, which is just mushrooming right now with Christians. And also in the historically Muslim nations, the growth of the church and the gospel has been phenomenal. But there are still 2 billion unreached people living in the 1040 window. 2 billion who don't know about Jesus. They aren't rejecting Jesus, they just don't.
Yes, I think my hometown is one of them.
Could be.
Yes,
Could be.
absolutely.
82% of the world's poorest people live in that same 1040 window.
Yes, because it's on the place.
Some of us, some of you, need to be going to the 1040 window. Part of what I do with Pacific Islands University is train islanders who are planning to go to these unreached peoples. And some of my students from Indonesia are actually already living next door to large groups of unreached people. Some of my former students from Micronesia are within just a few months of going to Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country in the world. some of you need to be hearing God say, be encouraged, just as you have told the people about me here in Arizona, so you must also be witnesses in the 1040 window. And wouldn't it be interesting if we as a church could actually adopt one or two people groups from these unreached peoples? And we could pray for them. We could figure out some short-term or even long-term ways of going there, or wherever there might be. We could maybe send people there. Yes?
Yes, now, so I say it's absolutely is my hometown is on the spot. Now in my factory, and most of the Chinese is Cantonese, they don't know Jesus Christ.
Well,
Even they hear, but they not really understand. So pray for them, please.
well, maybe that would be one of the groups that we
At least
pray
10
for.
to 15 people is Chinese from my hometown is work with me together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what this would exactly look like for us, I'm pretty sure I'm not the one that should spearhead it, and I wonder if God might be, by speaking it to some of you about helping to pursue the witness to some of the unreached peoples, whether they be in China or someplace else. Now, of course, there are plenty of people here who need a witness as well, and some of us are called to maintain the witness in Phoenix. But think about it. I mean, do you think that all of Jerusalem was evangelized before God sent Paul off to Rome to be a witness? No. God operates by continually pushing the boundaries out further and further. He's always pushing on the envelope just a little bit more. And that's why he calls on Paul to chin it up. He says, not so that Paul could feel good about himself and what he was doing and have a fulfilled job kind of thing, or a fulfilled calling in life. The Lord wanted Paul to be encouraged. I mean, Paul could have had a fulfilled ministry in Tarsus or in Jerusalem. He could have done just fine there. But Paul, the Lord wanted Paul to be encouraged so that he could get on with what it was that God wanted to see happen. And I wonder if that's not one of the things that's holding us back. We want everything to come together or everyone to come together as the church and hear God's word and to be converted and to be encouraged. But sometimes we seem to consider those things as the end in and of themselves, that we bring a group together. But somewhere along the line, we begun to think of the church as something we're supposed to pull together so that we can get something out of it, so that we can, nurture people. And there's some value in that. I mean, we want to get something out of it. But we kind of start to define things that way. Well, that was an all right Bible study we had. Or, the sermon was okay, but wasn't just me, but I didn't get anything out of it. We kind of, put it in that framework. Getting something has become the goal. It's become the end. It's become the purpose for a lot of us in terms of how we see the church. But here we see that the goal is not getting something, but giving something, or going. And God says, be encouraged. Not as an end in itself, so that you are happier and more satisfied with where you are, but so that you can carry on with your mission to be witnesses in Rome, wherever that Rome might be. Be encouraged. Just as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so too you must testify in Rome. So here I have a few questions to prime the pump. You're not limited to these questions. You're welcome to add other insights or comments or share a word of testimony as well. But where are the Romans today? May's already identified the end of the earth as far as she sees it is their hometown. What is your hometown?
In Canton, China, I think it's the southeast of the Pacific Ocean. So in the pretty close to the equation,
Equator.
equator,
Uh-huh.
and I think it's lower than 43.
Yeah.
So I think you say
If
the
it-
10-40 is
Yeah.
the pace.
Yeah. Well, where are some of the other Romes, the ends of the earth today, as far as places that you are aware of?
I think it's the north side.
The what?
The north side, in the north line, maybe. Have a look at the map.
How would we encourage more attention to unreached people groups? Off the top of your head, how do we foster that?
I think
Anyone else? Okay, go ahead.
I think the first one the people need to try to learn the other culture is the first step. If they don't understand the other culture,
So cultural awareness of other groups
they
helps.
have to understand the
Yeah.
cross-cultural important is understand this one, how to deal with the different culture people.
Okay. How might you find out more about unreached people groups?
Google it. Yeah, the internet.
I mean, it's all right there. You Google unreached people groups and you get the first one up is like Joshua Project, and
Yes.
there's just a list of all of these wonderful ways that you can find out about names of the different groups. They've actually done some cataloging of the cultural groups that and the characteristics of the cultural groups that have no witness in them.
Filipinos.
There could be places in
Many here already.
southern part of Filipino.
I think especially the people, they have their own religions.
Yeah. I mean, that's all there. But different groups are kind of different. So it would be interesting to go home this afternoon and Google unreached people groups and see if you could find what some of those are.
To me, Rome is not that far away.
Okay.
I think I just have to open my eyes to see who is in need of the touch, especially broken families.
Yep. In some ways, Rome is not so far away. I mean, geographically, maybe, but there's some other ways that it encroaches into our own world. I mean, you talk about broken families, but you can talk about cultural groups where the groups. The world is in this great migration right now, and it's most of the people. We look at immigration and we say all these people are coming to the United States. We take in a small part of the immigrants in the world. We really are not doing very much with immigrants compared to what's happening in the rest of the world. But people are in this massive movement around the world right now. They're just going left, right, all over the place. And so that means that some of the unreached groups are going to end up in other places, some will end up in our backyard. And so how do you connect with those people?
You remind me about the book I listened this last week is one night. You remember I talk about why the people like to reach the people in the other country, but ignore about our neighbor, the need of our neighbor. In the United States, I think a lot of people still unreached.
Yes, but as a group of people,
Even
the people in the United States, there are a lot of gospel witnesses here. You turn on the radio, people, it may not be connecting, but there are just a lot of witnesses here. But there are places in the world where there is no one saying anything about Jesus, because there's just been nobody that's been there to do it. That's what an unreached people group is a group where there is nobody that is there talking about Jesus. It's kind of like what Rome was back in Paul's day. There were a few Christians in Rome at that point who had gone there during the dispersion, the diaspora, but on a whole, the church did not have a strong presence. It was not clearly, people didn't know it was there.
I think it's the reason is not about the people, they don't hear the gospel. I talk about in our labor in here.
Right.
It's the people we don't talk about also. Not only,
Yeah, you renew the witness here.
yeah, we don't really win this, win this.
And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, close by,
Yeah, close by.
Judea, a little further out, Samaria, a little bit further out. Talk about concentric circles, it means circles come out.
Yeah.
Samaria, and as you go further out, each of those groups of people are going to be different than you are, and to the end of the earth. It's not one or the other, it's all of these things.